In June of 1846, 39 people left Fort Laramie. They were the Harlan Byers wagon party. Their plan was to cross the Blue Mountains into the Willamette Valley. They never arrived. A government search party was sent to find them. When they located the camp, there were no signs of an attack. The wagons were packed. The livestock were standing in complete silence. But the party was gone. They found almost no trace of them. The only clues to what happened were recovered from the site: a surveyor's letter and a daily logbook, kept exactly as we found it. The parcel arrived in February, wrapped in oilcloth, stiff from the cold and tied with brown cord. The address was written in a cramped hand. Inside was a short letter from a shipping agent in Fort Vancouver, Oregon Territory, explaining in plain language that the enclosed documents had been recovered from an abandoned campsite somewhere in the Blue Mountains, east of the Columbia River, in September of 1846. He didn't editorialize. He said the site appeared to have belonged to a westbound wagon party of roughly 40 persons. He said the party never arrived at any recorded destination. He thought someone in England might want to know. I found the wagon master's name on a departure manifest filed at Fort Laramie the previous June: Elias Marsh, age 44, of Derbyshire. 39 names below his, all confirmed present at multiple points along the trail. None of them ever appeared in any record again after that. I've spent the months since trying to locate surviving family. I haven't found any. I've made no additions and no subtractions to what follows. I have corrected only obvious transcription errors. I leave all interpretation to whoever holds these pages next. The Harlan Byers Oregon Trail Caravan. The first document is the trail ledger of Elias Marsh, wagon master, covering the period June 2nd through August 17th, 1846. The second document is a letter from one Mr. R. Leland, acting on behalf of the Oregon Provisional Government, written in September 1846 and addressed to no one. It was found folded inside the ledger. June the 2nd, 1846. We departed Fort Laramie with 39 souls and livestock enough to carry us through. I'd done this route twice before. I knew the water sources, I knew the grades, I knew where the trail held and where it gave. I was a professional and I ran a professional operation, and I want that understood before anything else. I recorded everything: weather, mileage, names, head count, the condition of the oxen, how much water we drew at each crossing, how many poles we cut, how many deer we took from each meadow we passed. I kept those figures the way a ship's captain keeps his log, because you want a clear record of where you've been and what you've used. That's just good practice. We picked up our guide at Fort Boise in early July. The fort's factor recommended him. A Shoshone man, goes by B in my ledger because his given name didn't translate cleanly and I didn't want to mangle it every time I wrote it down. He'd been guiding parties through the Blue Mountains stretch for 11 years. Knew every water source, every passable grade, every dead end for 200 miles in any direction. Within 2 days of having him on the trail, I understood why the factor had been so certain about him. He was quiet, competent. The women and children took to him faster than the men did, which is generally how it goes. He had habits I wrote down as observances, which was the polite term. Before creek crossings, he'd crouch at the bank and speak quietly, not loud enough to make out any sound, just a low movement of his lips, then set something on the nearest dry rock. A pinch of something from his coat pocket, usually. At ridgelines, he'd pause before leading us through, not looking at the horizon the way you would if you were checking weather, but at a fixed point somewhere in the trees ahead, as though confirming something he already half knew. I noted his observances in the ledger and moved on. The first trouble came from somewhere else. 2 days out of Fort Boise, Morrison's setter stopped coming into camp in the mornings. It would sleep inside the perimeter at night. You'd see it curled by the nearest wagon wheel, same as always. But come sunrise, it was always sitting about 30 feet out from the wagons. At some line it had decided not to cross. Not trembling. It sat upright and still, locked on something we couldn't see. Its whine was low and constant, the same note over and over. Morrison tried calling it back in. It wouldn't come. I noted it in the ledger as a minor animal curiosity and left it there. That same night was the first time we heard the sounds. From the tree line to the east, just past where the firelight reached. I sent Morrison out with a lantern. He came back and said he'd found nothing. Over the next few days, I asked several people to describe what they were hearing because they weren't agreeing, and I wanted to know if there was any consistency to it. One man said clicking, rhythmic, like someone running a thumbnail slowly along the teeth of a comb. I wrote it down as animal noise in the brush and left it there too. 10 days out from Fort Boise, I told B we'd be taking a southern variation through the mountains. I'd heard from another party it cut 2 days off the standard grade. We were behind schedule. I needed those 2 days. Not that way, he said. I asked him to explain himself. The ground on the southern route had graves in it, old ones. He said that land had a particular use and had held it for longer than anyone alive could account for, and you didn't pass through it without acknowledging where you were and what you were doing there. His people didn't go through it. The Yakama didn't. The Nez Perce didn't. Not without ceremony, not without giving something back for what they took. I heard a capable man telling me he was afraid of ghosts. I told him so as pleasantly as I could, because I had no interest in being unkind about it. I said we'd be fine. We were experienced travelers. We weren't going to be there long. He didn't argue. He named the ground in his own language and gave its English approximate, the resting place of the first ones. He told me he had taken parties around that ground for 11 years and would not take one through it. I wrote in my ledger that he objected on religious grounds and that I had explained we couldn't afford the extra days. I went to sleep that night with the counting still in my ears. I told myself it was an animal. I told myself that 2 or 3 times before sleep came. That was a first for me. B's horse was saddled before the camp was fully awake. He came to me in the gray before sunrise while the cook fires were still being lit. He didn't ask again. I know you won't turn back once you've decided. I know that about you already. He was quiet for a moment. God have mercy on you. He said it in English, which I found notable enough to record. He rode north, away from the southern route, toward the standard trail. I watched him until the tree line took him. I wrote in the ledger. Guide B departed this morning without leave and forfeiting payment. His superstitions proved incompatible with the requirements of this company. We entered the southern passage that same morning. The country was beautiful. Long meadows opening between stands of pine and fir, timber so dense and tall it shaded the wagons entirely, the light coming through in long, pale columns. Good water at every crossing. I wrote in the ledger that I could not imagine what B had found objectionable about this ground. I believed it when I wrote it. That afternoon, I made a note of something and then crossed it out and wrote it again differently. The shadows of the pines fall wrong in the late afternoon. What I wrote over it was, strange light conditions, likely weather coming. The first full night on the southern route, the clicking started up again, and this time, it didn't stop. It came from the tree line all around us, never from one direction, always just past the edge of the firelight where you couldn't fix on it. And it kept the same pace all night, low and steady, without pausing. It went on from dark until sometime past midnight, and then stopped, all at once, mid-count. The air up in those mountains goes cold after midnight even in July, and I'd been lying still in my bedroll with my eyes open for a long time, listening. The camp had divided overnight without anyone deciding to divide it. By breakfast, it was clear that roughly half the party had heard nothing at all. They slept through, they said, and they believed it, and the other half had been awake for most of the night, listening. These two halves didn't argue about it exactly, but they couldn't settle each other either, and after a few attempts, they stopped trying. I sided with the ones who slept. I wrote in the ledger, "Several party members report animal sounds in the timber. I slept without disturbance." That was the first time I wrote something in the ledger I knew wasn't accurate. Agnes Hollis had been on the manifest since independence, and I'd had no reason to single her out for a particular entry until now. 35, a widow, traveling with her daughter Clara, who was 9, and her son James, who was 7, going to join a brother-in-law's homestead claim outside Salem. She was competent with her animals, and she didn't complain, which are the qualities that matter on the trail and the only ones I'd had occasion to observe. She was one of the ones who heard the sounds, and she handled it by dragging her bedroll closer to the fire. She did it herself, one-handed, in the dark, without asking anyone and without explaining herself, and I respected that. The fire was burning low by then, down to orange coals, and she settled with her back to it and her face toward the trees. Mrs. Cartwright asked her what she made of the noises, and Mrs. Hollis kept her eyes on the dark past the wagons and said, "I can't tell if it's counting or something that sounds like counting. That's what bothers me." And she didn't say anything else about it. Her daughter Clara slept straight through every night, and Mrs. Hollis would sometimes watch her sleeping with a tense, unblinking expression. On a Tuesday morning, I sent Morrison and a younger man named Deeks out to the North Meadow for game. Morrison I trusted as much as I trusted anyone on the trail. Deeks was 22, his first Western crossing, but he'd proven himself steady. They went out at first light and came back in the middle of the afternoon from the east, from behind the camp, from the direction we'd come from, with no game and a look on both of them I didn't know what to make of. Both men were sweating when they walked in, despite the cool of the afternoon, and neither had fired a shot. Morrison checked his rifle while he was talking to me, worked the action once, then set it down, and I don't think he noticed he'd done it. He told me they'd walked north in a straight line the whole morning, and Deeks confirmed it exactly, both of them saying the same thing in the same order. They walked north, the light went wrong, and then they were walking toward camp from the opposite side. They couldn't account for the time, and they couldn't account for the direction, and they had no disagreement at all between their two accounts, which I found harder to dismiss than a contradiction would have been. Two men who quarreled and wandered will tell you slightly different stories. These two told me the identical one. The clicking continued the second night, and the third, and then on the third night something new came in underneath it, a whistle, low and even and long, starting at roughly the same hour each night and running until about 2 in the morning. It was pitched so low you felt it in your back teeth before you properly heard it. Where the clicking had split the camp, the whistle reached almost everyone, and the ones who'd heard nothing before heard it now, and the conversation around the fire that evening was quiet, and nobody was arguing anymore. Nobody could name it, not a bird, not wind, not any animal they knew. And what nobody could quite explain was that it felt aimed, not ambient, not incidental, but pointed at something specific, though none of them could say at what. One of the women came to me and told me it sounded like her name. She couldn't explain it better than that. She said it didn't have the sound of her name, it had the shape of it, and she knew the distinction didn't make any sense, but it was the only way she could put it. She was embarrassed, and I thought that was worth noting. I wrote it down and then left a blank day in the ledger after it. Cartwright came to me on the 4th night, after the whistle had gone quiet, and told me what he'd seen at the tree line. He was not an excitable man. He checked his wagon wheels before breakfast every morning and kept a running count of his provisions without being asked. And I wanted understood that he was not the sort of man who saw shapes in the dark. He stood in front of me and told me plainly there had been something standing at the edge of the trees, right at the line where the firelight stopped, close to 2 minutes, and then it wasn't there anymore. He couldn't describe it well, and he kept stopping himself from trying, because every time he tried to fix on a detail, it came apart on him. He knew it was tall. He knew it was still in a way that was different from an animal's stillness, different from a person's. And he said it had what he called a quality of attention I have only seen in men accounting for something. He didn't look afraid when he said it, and he told me he wasn't afraid, and he couldn't account for that himself. I sent Morrison out at first light to look at the base of the tree Cartwright indicated. Morrison came back and told me there was a depression in the earth there, roughly as wide as a barrel lid, maybe 2 inches deep at the center, the dirt packed flat and smooth, like it had been stood on for hours. No tracks leading to it or away from it, just that circle of pressed earth. I recorded this and moved on to mileage. Wednesday morning, I found Agnes Hollis's bedroll empty. Both children were asleep beside it, undisturbed, and the fire hadn't been touched, and the ground had gone soft from rain in the night, dark and smooth and completely unmarked, and it would have taken any footprint clearly. The whole camp smelled of wet pine and cold ash. I circled the camp and circled it again, and searched the near trees and found nothing. No prints beyond the camp perimeter. Not one. I stood at the edge of that soft ground for a long time, looking at where the tracks should have been, and then I went and wrote in the ledger that Agnes Hollis, widow, age 35, had gone missing in the night with no sign of violence. Wednesday. Morrison north with 4 men, Deeks east with 3, west myself with 2. Searched until the timber closed, came back, searched again after midday. No sign of Mrs. Hollis. Search parties returned without result. Will resume at first light. Thursday. Searched all quadrants. The mud was soft. There were no tracks. Will resume tomorrow. Friday. Half the party wishes to move on. The other half will not leave a woman behind. Told them we wait 5 days. Saturday. Partly cloudy. Cold. Clara Hollis did not cry. The women in the camp took turns sitting with her and her brother James, who was 7 and scared in the ordinary way a 7-year-old is scared, loud about it, close to tears, wanting someone to tell him something that would make the feeling stop. Clara was different. Each morning she sat through the same routine without tears. She stared at the trees. Is today the day she comes back? Not will she. Not do you think she will. But is today the day, as if the return was already fixed and only the timing wanted settling. The women tried to comfort her and she let them, but she didn't need it. She ate normally. She slept well. In the evenings, she sat at the edge of the firelight and watched the tree line. She looked patient. On the second day, I organized a prayer meeting. Father Breen said what needed saying and the whole party attended, and I recorded it in the ledger the same way I'd record the water consumption of the mule teams. Held prayer meeting for the safe return of Mrs. Hollis, missing since Wednesday last. Father Breen officiated, attendance, all present. The sounds continued, the clicking and the low whistle both, and closer, people said, or seeming closer, though you couldn't measure a thing like that, and no one could prove it wasn't just 6 days of listening making everything feel nearer than it was. On the 6th morning, Clara pointed at the tree line. "She's coming back today." 3 women heard her say it. They looked at the tree line and saw nothing, and then one of them opened her mouth to say something reassuring and stopped, because by noon, Agnes Hollis walked out of the trees. Her clothes were intact. That was the first thing, not torn, not dirty, not weather-worn in any way you'd expect from a woman who'd spent 6 days alone in the Blue Mountains. Everything was in place, every button through the right hole, everything fastened where it belonged. It was wrong. Mrs. Cartwright noticed it first. She said it looked like someone had dressed her from a description, rather than from practice. Mrs. Hollis stood at the edge of the camp. She looked at her children without recognition. Her eyes moved over them slowly. Then she walked toward them and fell. We put her to bed. She slept 14 hours, and I wrote, "Mrs. H is resting." The night was the quietest we'd had since entering the passage, No clicking, no whistle, nothing from the tree line at all, and several people took it as a sign that whatever had been watching us was satisfied or gone, and I wanted to believe that too, and I wrote, "The night passed without incident, and I was almost certain I was writing something true." Morrison had been on watch, and he came to me in the morning and told me the livestock had been more unsettled that night than on any night with the sounds. Not distressed, he was clear about that. Not frightened, but attentive. All of them, every animal facing the same direction with their ears up and their eyes wide open, the way an animal looks when it's listening to something you can't hear. He told me he hadn't thought to note what direction they were facing. By morning, he'd forgotten. She was up with the camp the next day. She answered questions, she held her children, but she was different. I spent the morning watching her. She measured things with her eyes. She was steady and deliberate, except she was measuring things that had no need of measuring. The distance between two people standing in conversation, the height of the fire, the width of the gap between two wagons. She'd look, and something in her face would settle, and she'd move on to the next thing. She had stopped using names. The pines she called the standing ones. The creek she called the running one. The oxen she called the pulling ones. When someone pointed this out, she looked at them with what I can only describe as genuine puzzlement, as if she didn't understand what was wrong with any of it. And she counted. Quietly, under her breath, when she thought no one was listening. Stones in the fire ring, paces between the wagons, fence posts along the water line. Always finished before anyone could be sure she'd started, and always, as far as anyone could tell, right. I wrote in the ledger, "Mrs. H is recovered in body. Her manner is altered in ways I cannot precisely describe. I will speak with her this afternoon." I closed the ledger and looked across the camp at her. She was standing at the edge of the firelight, facing the trees. I brought paper. I have not done that before, not with anyone on this route. I spoke with her alone at the edge of camp, in the shade, and I knew before she said a word that I was going to want the exact words. She sat straight. Her hands were in her lap. She never looked away. Her eyes were wide. Her voice was flat and even. That steadiness made me write faster. She had no memory of leaving, not vague memory, no memory at all, and she was clear about the difference. Her last clear recollection was Wednesday supper. James was fussing about his boots. Her next memory was standing in the trees that morning, and she was looking at the camp, and her feet were already moving toward it. Between those 2 points, nothing. Not dark, not sleep, not even the sense of time passing. Just supper, and then the tree line with camp visible ahead. But she knew things. She said she knew things she hadn't known before, and the difference was in how she knew them, not figured out, more like told, and she was as certain of them as she was of her own name. She said the land had a record. She said the party had taken from it water, timber, game, the act of passing through ground that had a different use, that had been for something else for longer than any of them could account for, and that all of it had been written down, and the record wasn't settled. She didn't use the word debt, and I noted that specifically, and she didn't frame it as punishment either. She said, "The record isn't settled, and it wants to be." And there was a message. She was certain of this too. The debt can be settled today. If we remain, it will be settled tomorrow. I asked what would happen if we stayed, and she said she didn't know what collecting meant in this context, and when the word came out she stopped and looked down at her hands, and I wrote it down, collecting. I asked where it came from, and she looked back up at me with that unsettled expression she'd had since she walked out of the trees. Then I asked what was out there. She was quiet for a long time. She looked at her hands. "I don't think it's one thing. I think it's a keeping, like a ledger." I wrote that word down, ledger, and I did not comment on it. I read the relevant portion of my notes to the assembled party that afternoon, and it split them along a line that had been forming for days, one I'd been pretending not to see. The ones who did not hear the sounds, 8 or 10 of them, steady people, people I trust, heard the account of a woman who had been alone in the wilderness for 6 days and come back delusional, and they were sympathetic and they were unconvinced. The ones who heard the sounds wanted to break camp within the hour. They argued quietly. Neither side could prove anything. I went back to Agnes Hollis a second time, alone. I asked her what she had seen out there. She took a long time with it. Then, I don't think it wanted to be seen. I don't think it has a face exactly. I think it makes something that works like a face when it needs one. I wrote that down, and I moved on. August 15th. We will rest one additional day to allow Mrs. H and the livestock to recover their strength and depart tomorrow at first light. I have made this party a promise, and I will keep it. Estimated distance to the pass, 22 miles, 3 days at current pace. The pass we need to clear is 3 days ahead, and the autumn storms in the blues come fast and without warning, and I have brought 38 people across 2,000 miles of continent, and I am not going to strand them on the wrong side of a mountain because a woman had a vision in the woods. I do not believe she is lying. I believe she is damaged, and that what she received out there was her own mind's way of making sense of 6 days of cold and fear and hunger. In the afternoon, 3 children pointed at the tree line. Not together, separately, at different times in different parts of the camp, each of them just lifting an arm and pointing in the same direction without saying a word. The sun was behind the pines. The trees were dark. The adults who saw them do it didn't agree on whether they were pointing at the same spot. I asked Clara Hollis about it. She looked at me. I know, it was there this morning too. Agnes Hollis spent the afternoon at the edge of camp with her hands on her knees and her face toward the trees, and she didn't look at anyone who walked past her, and I watched her from across the fire ring, and she did not look frightened, just still, and I did not go to her. The sounds came back at dark, and they were closer than they had ever been, and several people stood up from their fires and didn't sit back down. Morrison came to me and told me he'd seen figures at the tree line, plural this time, and he tried to describe them and stopped mid-sentence, not frightened, just unable to find the next word. He shook his head. I can't hold on to what I'm seeing long enough to put it into words. He said every time he tried to fix on a detail, it was already gone before he could name it, and he knew he'd seen something, and he could not tell me what. One of the horses broke its tether at 11 and did not run. It's just standing there, staring into the tree line. Fire is almost gone, barely 4 feet of light left. The woods just went dead. No wind, no nothing. Completely silent now. Something is standing right at the edge of the light. Can you see it? Oh God, it's too tall to be human. August 17th. The Harlan Byers party, guided by one Elias Marsh of Derbyshire, departed Fort Boise in late July of this year, bound for the Willamette Valley by way of the Blue Mountains Passage. They did not arrive. Fort Vancouver had no record of them passing. 2 resupply stations along the standard northern route confirmed they had not come through. I was given 6 men and told to find them and render whatever assistance was required. We followed the departure trail from Fort Boise without difficulty, and by the 3rd day we reached the point where the party had left the standard route and turned south. The shortcut variation, 2 days passage shorter, documented passable. September cold in the blues, frost on the grass each morning, and gone by mid-morning, sky clear, the trail hard and dry, and our horses making a clean cracking sound on the hardpan. There had been no flood, no rock slide, nothing in the landscape that explained a missing party of 39, and the country had no interest, as far as I could tell, in advertising that anything had happened here at all. We found the livestock 3 miles before the camp. 40-odd animals have a sound to them, breathing, tails switching, hooves shifting, the low tearing sound of grass being cropped. These animals were completely silent. 40-odd animals standing together in a field and not one of them making a sound. They were standing in a long, loose grouping that hadn't drifted. No tethers, no pen, just standing in the grass, well-fed and apparently healthy, and not trying to leave. Healthy animals don't stand like that. They did not come to us when we rode up, which by itself means nothing, but they didn't acknowledge us either, and that was the thing. We rode within 20 feet of the nearest group, and not one of them looked over. Their ears didn't move. My horse pulled at the bit. I pressed my heels in. The animals didn't move. I wrote that down. Their attention was somewhere else entirely. The camp was orderly. That was the first thing, and I want to be clear about it, because orderly is not the word I expected to use. The wagons were packed and tied down, wheels chalked, canvas covers lashed at every eyelet, departure ready, every last piece, as if the order to move had been given and the people had simply not yet climbed up to their seats. The fire ring was cold. The ash was still loose and gray, not crusted. The ledger was sitting open on the wagon master's seat, open to a blank page with a date written at the top of it, August 17th. Nothing after the date. Just blank, and the page was dry and undamaged, which meant it had been covered by the canvas when the wagon was packed up, and not open long enough to collect the usual road dust. I picked it up. The leather was stiff from the cold. I read the whole ledger, all of it. The final entry I will set down here exactly as Marsh wrote it. Weather clear, planned mileage, 12 miles. I find I cannot sleep, the camp is quiet. I write this by the last of the fire. Below it, a date only. August 17th, nothing else. The rest of the page, blank. They were sitting around the cold fire ring, just two of them, a man and a woman. They were perfectly intact, no blood, no marks of violence. I want to be careful about this because I know how it reads, and I was there. I saw it. And I am telling you, the ground beneath them was dry and undisturbed. The grass was unbent. I have worked around the dead. These people did not die of exposure or starvation. They appeared to have simply concluded. I recorded their features, their approximate ages, and their clothing in strict detail. Then we searched for the others. We searched the camp perimeter and the tree line to a depth of 30 yards in every direction. The pine duff was thick and soft and held our boot prints clearly. There were no other prints in it. We found no trace of the other 37 members of the Harlan Byers party. I do not have an explanation for that absence, and I am not going to pretend I do. We buried the bodies. I will write that I did not call for a prayer service and that I am a church-going man and I did not call for one. We did not make camp here. I made this decision and I will not defend it to anyone who was not present. We rode north, toward the standard route, and did not stop until long after dark. I am sending this account, along with the ledger, to Fort Vancouver, with instructions that both be forwarded to any known family of the party or, failing that, to the relevant authorities in England. I do not know what happened to the Harlan Byers party. I do not intend to return to that site. I am not, generally speaking, a man given to fear. I note for the record, the livestock. We rode our horses directly past them. They didn't shift. When I looked back from the bend in the trail, they were there, watching us go. September 1846, signed R. Leland, acting surveyor. This letter was found folded inside the ledger. England, spring, 1848. Leland found two bodies. The Fort Laramie manifest lists 39 names. I have spent the better part of 4 months trying to reconcile Leland's physical descriptions of the dead with the emigration records. I obtained my own copy of the manifest. I went through it, name by name. 39 names, all confirmed at multiple points along the trail, cross-referenced against fort records and supply ledgers. I went through Leland's descriptions carefully. He recorded everything he could about the man and the woman. I cross-referenced these details against the 39 names on the manifest. Neither of them matches. They are not on the manifest. They are not latecomers added at Fort Boise. 39 people vanished into the timber. The woods left 2 strangers behind. I do not know who Leland buried. I have no explanation for that. I have stopped looking for one. Agnes Hollis is on the manifest. She was not at the camp. I found a trace of her through months of correspondence. She appeared again in St. Louis in 1847. Same description, different name. She stayed 3 weeks. She left one body behind the exact same way. There was not a single mark on him. He just stopped. In a third city, a coroner noted the identical condition, a healthy man simply ceasing to be. He recorded it because he would rather be thought a fool than leave out the truth. I transcribed his note. I didn't know what else to do with it. I cannot find Clara or James Hollis anywhere after Fort Laramie. They are not with her or with anyone. They are not in any record I have been able to locate in 8 months of looking, and I have decided, for reasons I will not commit to paper, to stop looking. I have sent copies of this account to 3 addresses and kept one here, and it sits now in the drawer of this desk, and I am aware of it, a quality of presence that I cannot verify by looking and cannot dismiss by not looking. I do not know what the Harlan Byers party encountered in the Blue Mountains. I do not know what Mrs. Hollis is now, or what she was when she delivered the warning, or whether the warning was meant to be followed or was designed to produce exactly what followed. I do not know what was in those woods. I know only what it left behind. I have been told that the tribes of that territory have their own name for the ground the southern route passes through, and that they do not say it except in ceremony, and have not entered that ground willingly in longer than anyone alive can say. When I pressed for the name, I was told, "You already have everything you need from this story. Don't go looking for the rest." I find I agree with him. I am locking this in the drawer and going to bed. Twilight Rex here. Thanks for being here for this. I put a lot into these, and it means everything that you stay till the end. Back again later this week. Until then, good night.